To Kim reads. I will be reading the 10th and final chapter of Helen Keller by Margaret Davidson. The busy years. Helen was very lucky, and she knew it. My life is so rich in two things, she said, friends and books. But what about the other deaf and blind people who are not so lucky? Helen knew that many led lonely lives with no family and few friends. Often they were too poor to go to school. Too often the blind never learned how to read with their hands. Too often the deaf were not taught to speak with their mouths. Their days were long and dull. And life is made up of days, Helen Keller said. Helen was 24 years old now. She had many more years to live, and she was determined to do something useful in those years. She decided to become a writer. She should write about the problems about the blind and deaf. But soon Helen found that most people wanted her to write only about herself. They were not interested in how to save a baby's eyes from blindness or in a new kind of school for the deaf. Helen kept on writing, but now she thought of another way to help. She decided to give lectures. She and teacher would travel from town to town all across the country, giving speeches about the problems of the blind and deaf. First, teacher came on stage and spoke about their early years together. Then Helen, in her blurred voice, told the audience what it was like to be deaf and blind. About the deaf, Helen Keller said, they are surrounded by silence, never to be broken by a word or a song or sigh of a breeze. About the blind, who Helen felt were the loneliest people in the world. She said, they stare into the dark, and nothing but the dark stares back. Helen also gave advice. I am who am blind, can only give one hint to you who can see. Use your eyes as if tomorrow you would go blind. Do the same with all your other senses. Hear the song of a bird as if tomorrow you would go deaf. Touch everything as if tomorrow you would never be able to touch anything again. Smell the flowers. Taste every bit of food as if you would never smell or taste again. Finally, Helen answered questions from the audience. Some of the questions people asked were serious ones. Others were just plain silly. Can you tell the difference between colors? She was asked again and again. There's stupid, and then there's advanced stupid. Sometimes I feel blue, and sometimes I see red, Helen would always answer. Do you sleep with your eyes open? I never stayed awake to see. Those kinds of questions would make my head hurt. The busy years were passing, and Helen Keller's teacher was growing old. One day she said to Helen, I'm sorry, dear, but I can't make any more trips with you. The teacher fell sick and had to spend most of her time in bed. You must get well, her friend begged. Helen would be nothing without you. Teacher frowned. Then I would have failed, she answered. She had worked all her life to make Helen free even of her. Annie Sullivan died on October 19, 1936. Helen had faced other pain in her life, but nothing like this. Her thoughts flew back over 50 years to the day when a young Annie had come to turn a wild animal child into a little girl. That was the most important day of my life, Helen said many times. It was my soul's birthday, the day my teacher came to me, and now she was gone. A big piece of my heart had just died too. How could she go on living without a teacher by her side? But there was so much to do. With the help of a wonderful woman named Polly Thompson, Helen continued to give her lectures. She went all over the United States. More and more often she went to foreign lands too. Then in 1939, a terrible war broke out in Europe. It spread to many countries of the world. Soon the men of the United States were fighting in the Second World War. Many were wounded in battle. Some were crippled and deafened. Others were crippled or blinded or lost arms and legs. Often these men did not go on living. President Franklin Roosevelt asked Helen Keller to visit them. He wanted her to help them see that life was still worth living. In the next few years, Helen went from hospital to hospital, all across the land, and everywhere the men welcomed her. "Gee," one soldier said, "I read about you in school. I never thought I'd be blind myself." Helen didn't try to fool these men with words of easy cheer. "Of course you'll have bitter moments," she said. "I do too. Of course there will always be days when you feel restless and lonely and cheated. All I can tell you is live as much like other people as you can. Keep your life full of books and works and friends." "I do, and look how well it has worked for me." When Helen Keller wasn't busy working, she filled her days with fun. She was always ready to go to new places and try new things. "Life is an adventure," Helen Keller said, "or it is nothing." From the cab of a train, she visited a coal mine deep in the earth. The stony tribe of Indians made her a blood sister. She flew in an open aircraft. She loved it. "We're riding on the wind," she cried. Helen went on the roughest camping trips. She visited the great cities of the world. She could tell many of these cities apart by their smells. The Italian section of New York smelled of garlic and salami and cheese. Paris smelled of perfume and powder and wine and tobacco. St. Louis smelled of beer. Finally, Helen Keller grew old and frail. She did not travel anymore. She went to her house in Westport, Connecticut. Her days were quiet now, but she still kept very busy. Helen got up before 5 every morning. First, she would make a simple breakfast for herself. Then she went for a walk. Helen would find her way by holding onto wires that stretched all around her land. "I cannot see or hear, but I find hundreds of things to interest me," she said. She loved to feel the smooth skin of a silver birch tree or the rough, shaggy bark of a pine. "If I'm lucky," she said, "I can put my hand on a small tree and feel it quiver as a bird sings in its branches." Helen still worked 6 or 7 hours a day at her desk. In the evening, friends often came to call. Late at night, Helen usually read herself to sleep. Many times, someone would go past her dark room and hear fingers brushing over raised letters or rows of braille dots. She lived until she was 87 years old. Then on June 1st, 1968, Helen Keller slipped away into the dark silence. Helen Keller was dead, but her spirit lives on. As she said so many times, the best and most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or even touched. They must be felt with the heart. And here are some pictures. Okay, so that was Helen Keller by Margaret Davidson. Hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you next time.